Hello and welcome to the Money Matters podcast from MoneyMagpie.com. If you're watching this podcast, don't forget to share and like the video and subscribe, of course, or just tell everybody how marvellous it is. You know you want to. I'm Jasmine and I'm the founder of MoneyMagpie.com, and I'm joined today by Duncan Stevens from Gretel, which is an amazing free service, that's the important thing, that will help you find lost pensions. Duncan, thank you so much for joining me.
Very pleased to be here.
So tell us a bit about yourself and what prompted you to set up Gretel.
So it's a very long story short. I've worked with companies for over 20 years trying to help them trace and reconnect with lost customers and help them reunite billions of pounds worth of lost money. And I'd worked alongside the government as part of the expansion of their dormant asset scheme a few years ago. And I realized that there wasn't a service that covered all the financial services sectors. And I wanted to create something that allowed a consumer with a minimal amount of information to be able to go off and find what is rightfully theirs across any aspect of the financial services industry, whether that be childhood investments, bank accounts, shares, or even pensions in this case.
I regularly get questions through radio and TV programs about how to trace lost pensions and also how to merge pensions, find lost ones and merge them with ones you've got now. And it really seems to be a problem for literally, I would say, millions of people to find stuff that they think vaguely they've got. Why is it so difficult?
So I think there's a number of things. So I think whilst most people remember, when they move house, they remember to tell their dentist or their GP, obviously, because they have to re-register. The reality is that only about 1 in 25 of us remember to tell our pension provider. Mm-hmm. So the data that they have on us is woefully out of date in many cases. It can be decades out of date. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to trying to find that information about yourself, actually, it can be quite difficult. There's a lot of information that you need to provide, such as you need your national insurance number, obviously, which most people would have, but you need to remember every company you've ever worked for. And particularly now, I think with the way in which, as a society, we've become more transient in terms of, the number of jobs that we have. It's no longer a job for life. So we're building up little pots of money all over the place, and it's quite difficult to keep tabs on. And I think the reality is, actually, even if you know all of that information, it can actually still be quite difficult. There are great services like the government's pension finding service on gov.uk, but unfortunately, the data that sits underneath that lists all of the schemes so that when you put in your information, you can go and find it, is in many circumstances incomplete or inaccurate. And I found that myself trying to track down a pension for a very major provider in the UK. And it just said, in my case, the data had been archived. So I came to a dead end.
It's really not helpful. And also my problem, because I mentioned, as you say, the government's pension tracing service a lot. And yeah, it does its best. But of course, as you say, you have to do a lot of the heavy lifting. You have to come up with as much information as possible. Whereas the thing I like about Gretel is basically you put your name and your date of birth and your national insurance number, and then you guys go off and do it, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, we don't even need you to put in your national insurance number. It's as simple as remembering your name, your current address, and your date of birth. And we can do the rest. And sure, if you want to add in things like national insurance number, it gives us a better chance of finding something if your address historically with that financial provider is horribly out of date. But you don't need to give it to us. And we did that for a really important reason, that we recognized that a lot of this lost money actually belongs to people who are elderly, perhaps vulnerable. There's 800, 900,000 people in the UK with dementia. And for them, remembering not only national insurance number, but remembering all the places they've ever worked is going to be absolutely impossible. So we wanted to make it as simple as possible so that if you're looking after someone who's vulnerable, or God forbid you're dealing with the estate of a lost loved one, then you're going to be in a situation where you can actually still search without the need for reams of paperwork from a box under the bed.
Yeah, because I mean, that's an interesting point, that you can actually look for somebody who's passed on. So if you are an inheritor, if you are, as you say, dealing with the estate of somebody who's passed on, there could be money there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we think there's around about kind of 15%, 20% or so of all of the money that's out there is sitting in estates just unclaimed. And it's because, you know, people, when they move house, they lose bits of paperwork. You know, in my case, I'm busy. I generally know where my stuff is, in terms of where my investments, my savings are, where my pensions are. But because I'm busy, I don't normally keep up to date with it as often as perhaps I should. I don't check in on it to make sure that it's the right value and it's in the right product, which is something I know I should do. But you know, we're all guilty of having busy lives these days.
Yeah, definitely. So how much money is at stake here? Because you're talking about, you know, percentages. Are we talking billions, millions? How much is actually in lost and forgotten pensions at the moment?
So in lost and forgotten pensions, so estimates vary. So the government thinks somewhere around 26.6 billion, which is a sizable amount.
Yes.
Private kind of industry research, some of which has been done by ourselves and others, puts the figure potentially closer to 64, 65 billion.
Wow.
Because I think when you look at it, the average value of a lost private pension can often be around kind of 23,500, £24,000. And the average value for a state pension is around about kind of 8, 9,500, something like that. So there's a big difference in the number, but whichever it is, it's a vast sum of money. And as you've said previously, that's as an amount of money, that is not to be sniffed at for anyone, given the cost of living crisis that we're going through at the moment.
Well, absolutely. And I'm assuming it affects millions of people, whether it's your own or somebody who's a relative who's not with us anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, so the government's research that they did at the tail end of last year indicated that there were about 2.8 million lost pensions. It's worth noting that that's a 75% increase on the same research that they did 4 years before that.
Wow, just
So
in 4 years.
Yeah, so just in 4 years, and I think this goes back to the fact that people change jobs a lot. So a lot of this will be small pots that have happened through auto enrollment. So now, obviously, whenever you go to work for an employer where they've got a small number of employees as a minimum, that actually you are guaranteed a pension of some kind. And it's a great thing to have in place, but it doesn't follow you when you change jobs. So there is potential, I think, particularly for the younger generation, to be building up potentially dozens of these small pots.
Yeah.
But even so, there are unclaimed pensions out there that are worth an absolute fortune on an individual basis, and people have just lost touch with them. So yes, so the government's research says about 2.8 million lost accounts. But I think it's also worth saying that that's just the ones that they know are lost. So again, I know I mentioned earlier that I'd use the gov.uk service to try and find my own pension from an employment I had kind of 15, 20 years ago. I knew all the details to be able to go and search for myself. But the reality is, when I actually got in touch with that pension scheme administrator, when I was able to track it down, I got in touch with them and they said, well, we didn't even know you were missing. Because the reality is that for most people these days, when you receive mail for someone who's not yourself, when you've moved into a new property, you might return the first letter, maybe the second one, but then you stop.
Yes,
And
true.
the way a lot of these financial services firms work is that they need 2 or 3 letters to be returned with kind of return to sender, no longer at this address kind of written on there, before they'll actually put a stop on your account, before they know that you're lost. So I think personally, I think the reality is the 2.8 million could actually be the tip of the iceberg.
Yes. And I think what a lot of people would be wondering is, while this money is sitting in these pension pots and possibly will never be claimed, who has that? What happens to that money? Who has it? Is it just the pension company? Is it, you know, Aviva and Prudential and whatever, they just...
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, so it will still sit there. You know, it will be with that financial provider. So it should be protected from that perspective. But here's part of where the challenge comes in: is if it was at one point a small pension provider, there's a lot of consolidation happening in the industry. There are tens of thousands of pension schemes out there relating to all the private pensions administered by the likes of Prudential, Aviva, and L&G and others. But there's also the occupational pensions that went with your employments. So there are squillions of potential places you could have to go and look for stuff. And a lot of those schemes got consolidated. A lot of them got bought. If you look at organizations like Phoenix Group, for example, who own Standard Life, they for many years went out and bought lots of these kind of old books of pensions, because that was their business model for how they grew their portfolio of customers. But if you thought that your pension was in one place, actually it now might be somewhere else. And that's where gov.uk should come into its own. But like I said, the data that's there isn't always the most accurate that it could be, but it's a good start for people.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, if you try Gretel, how long does it take to find out if you've got some pensions you've forgotten about? Because I can imagine some, if they're easy, it could be immediate. But some, if it's been bought by some other company and it's gone here and there, it might take months, isn't it, or years?
So it can take, kind of leaving Gretel to one side for a second. I mean, it can take people months to track this down, if not years, as you say. In the cases of pensions, in fact, any other investment. If you're dealing with someone's estate and you don't know where to start, there's a mind-boggling number of organizations that you could potentially go to try and find it, to be exhaustive in your search. So yes, I mean, it's very daunting for people. And I think that's why when we look at this, when we've done research on this, although about one in 4 people think that they've got something lost, only about 13% of people have ever tried to find it. Right. Which I think speaks to, that it's not as easy as pensions providers would make you have believed. So, but in terms of Gretel, so the whole idea of Gretel was to make it a really simple, quick process with minimal information. Obviously, make it free. Obviously, that goes without saying. But the idea is that within about 3 minutes, you should be able to find whatever's out there for you. Now, the proviso is that data has to be on our platform. So the reality is that whilst for some people, we will find you a match almost instantaneously, as you say, for other people, we won't do. But what we will do, and unique to us, is that we will keep searching for you. So whereas every other service that you could think about is a one-time search, what we're doing is saying, look, once you've registered with us, Jasmine, look, we'll keep searching for you every 14 days.
Right.
And part of that is making sure that if you do move house and you forget to tell your pension provider, at some point, you will become marked as missing, or what they call gone away. And the moment that happens, so long as you're registered with Gretel, we'll flag that to you and we'll send you an email and say, great news, we found your match. And you log in, and we'll keep doing that for you for as many years as you stay with us. But the more serious angle to that, I think, was the fact that, again, back to the point around dementia, no one knows whether they're going to get that or not. And actually, the reality is we wanted to act as almost a protection mechanism for people, that in the event of memory loss of whatever kind, that actually we were the safety net, that we could help people. So long as you're on our platform, we'd be able to notify you.
Yes, and speaking of platforms, what about the pensions dashboard? Because I think it's a really good idea, but it's, they've been saying it would be coming for about the last 15 years. I think it's going to be another 3 years or something. So the idea, as you know, with the pensions dashboard is that everybody should have their own dashboard where they can see all their pensions and investments and whatever in one place. Now, if that actually does happen, and they say it will, that should obviate the need to search for old pensions, really. I mean, they'll be all there, won't they?
I mean, in theory, yes, they will be. And I think, like you, I think it's a great idea. We're massively behind it. We'd never really set out to try and be a pensions dashboard, because we always knew that it was coming. But it's a shame that it's taking as long as it is. And it seems to be costing the taxpayer an awful lot of money for what has seemingly been very little progress to date. I think the frustration with it from our perspective is that it was due to be starting to be delivered later this year, around about now. That was the go live date, and that was already delayed from several years ago. But just a couple of months before that go live date, the government's pushed it another 3 years down the line, and that's a real shame. I think particularly from the perspective that you've got 700,000 people or so hitting retirement age every year. So another 3 years down the line, that's 2.1 million people who may not be able to find their pensions. And that's not great.
No.
But back to your point about, people won't have to go searching. They will still have to create a pensions dashboard account. It won't just suddenly show up in your open banking necessarily. The dream, I think, ultimately is that will happen. That if you have online banking with Lloyds Banking Group, for example, that your Scottish Widows pensions will show up there and others from outside of the group will be there. I think that's generally the way that we're going.
Yeah.
The reality is that there is still bad data in there. There are still, if you think about the example I was giving about myself with my pension, that provider didn't even know I was missing. For 10 years, they didn't know I was missing. And having worked in this industry for 25 years, I know that the number of accounts, the number of pension policies that scheme providers think they've got is typically about 10%, 10-15% of the actual number.
Really, that small? Good grief.
Because they haven't. Some schemes are on top of it, but an awful lot of schemes haven't really paid serious attention until very recently to getting their member data quality in order. And that's a challenge because it means that it's going to be more difficult for you when the pensions dashboard launches to make sure that you find what is rightfully yours.
So it does sound to me, just to finish, that it is actually worth it for all of us to go onto Gretel and just go and look, even if you think, no, I'm sure there isn't anything, or my mum, my gran, all these, no, I'm sure there's nothing. You might as well look, because it sounds like the pensions companies are at 6s and 7s, so it's going to take them a long time to find anything as well.
Yes, it's going to take at least another 3 years for anything to happen, and we can help you now. We have billions of pounds worth of information on our platform, and by no means do we have every pensions company on there, but we've got a really broad mix of information for people to find. And obviously, it's not just about pensions. So there's every reason to go and search, even if you don't think you've got a lost pension, we may find you something else.
Yeah, which is brilliant. Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Duncan. Really great to have you on. And if you're hoping to find a pot of money in a lost pension, just go to gretel.co.uk, put your details in, just 2 things, date of birth and your name, and let the site do the rest. Easy stuff. Thank you for joining us on the MoneyMagpie Money Matters podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The button's just below on the screen. And generally gush about us, because you know you want to. Today's podcast was presented by me, Jasmine Birtles, and you can follow me on Twitter at Jasmine and on Instagram at Jasmine Birtles, or follow MoneyMagpie at MoneyMagpie on all the social media channels.